Commanding Force has released a couple of balancing changes that have mixed up the meta, and so today I felt it would be a good idea to do a new operator tier list. So make for sure you watch until the end to figure out where Brava is placed. Where I placed her will surprise you. Now, the first operator we'll be talking about is obviously Sledge. Sledge, I think, is a solid A tier operator. He has nades, a good gun with a 1.5 on it, and his gadget is really good for doing vertical play. The only real downside of him is that he's a 3 armor, which can make him easy to nitro, but other than that, I think he's a solid operator. Next up, we have Thatcher, which I think is a clear S tier. He can counter pretty much every gadget the defenders have at their disposal, and he is extremely strong when it comes to his loadout, and he also has decent secondary gadgets as well. You can't really go wrong with Thatcher. You can pick Thatcher pretty much every round, and you'll get some utility out of him. Then next up is Smoke, which is a clear S tier. If you've been playing the game for longer than a couple seasons, you know how strong Smoke is. He has a deployable shield, which is the strongest secondary gadget in the game without a question, and he has a super strong gadget for denying the plant. He also has a shotgun that allows him to make rotates, head holes, and everything that you could possibly need when it comes to destruction. So there's really no downside to Smoke. I think he belongs in the S tier clearly. Joining Smoke in the S tier is Mute as well. Mute has the exact same loadout as Smoke, which is amazing. He also has a nitro cell on top of it, which is really strong. And his gadget allows him to counter drones and to stop walls from getting breached if you really need to. So considering the vast versatility that Mute has, I think he belongs in S tier. Next up, we have Ashe. I think Ashe is a solid B tier. Ashe isn't a bad operator by any means. I just think there's other operators that do her job better, like Zofia. So I think it's not justified to put her in the A tier. Next up, we have Thermite. I think Thermite is another B tier operator. I think he's a solid hard breacher. He can get the job done if you need him to, but he's not nearly as versatile as some other operators that I'll be talking about later in the video. He's mainly useful to get outside walls open, but other than that, you can't really bring him because his gadget is just unsafe. He does have good guns with the 5.56 and stuff, but I still don't think it's worth putting him higher than B tier. Next up, we have Pulse, which will also be joining him in the B tier. Pulse is a solid operator depending on the bomb site you're running. If you're running a bomb site that has a lot of destructible floors, you can play below with him and get some free kills and deny the plan if you need to. Pulse can single-handedly win you rounds, but his gun just isn't great and he isn't super versatile. You can only run him on specific bomb sites, so that's why I think he belongs in the B tier. Next up, we have Castle, which I think is an undoubtedly A tier operator. His gadget is insane. He has 4 castle barricades now, and they also buffed how quick it is to place his gadgets on windows, which is nice. He has a super shorty, which allows him to make rotates and head holes, and his secondary gadgets, the prox alarm and deployable camera, are decent. So I really don't think you can go wrong with Castle. He does have a bad gun, but you're sacrificing your weapon for a ridiculous amount of utility, which I think is worth it. Next up is Twitch. I think with the recent nerf to her F2, she's A tier. She does have 2 additional drones now, which does make her a really strong intel gathering operator, but her guns just don't hold up to a lot of other attackers now because you pretty much are forced into running the 417. I do think her gadget is strong enough to just single-handedly put her in A tier, which is why I have her here. If it wasn't for the fact that she got her 2 extra drones, she'd probably be in B. Next up is Montagne. I think he's a solid C tier operator. Monty can be useful in the right hands and on the right bomb sites, but once again, he's just not that versatile, and you're not going to be able to run him in every single round and see success with him. So I don't think you can put him any higher than that. Also, the fact that he doesn't have a primary weapon compared to Osa, I just don't think it's worth running him now with Osa being in the game. Next up is Doc. I think Doc is a solid B tier. He is probably the best healer in the game right now. He has an MP5 with a 1.5, which is really good. His stims can heal you to full HP no matter what. Even if you're downed, Doc can heal you to full HP instantly, which is extremely strong when you get to use it. And he has a bailiff that allows him to make rotates for his teams and stuff. So you can't really go wrong with Doc. He's not an operator that you want to be running every round, but he is really good. However, I can't say the same about Rook. Rook is going to be going in the C tier with Monty. I think Rook has a lot of problems. The first one being that his Rook armor rarely comes into effect. When you get downed, most of the time you get finished anyway, and with Rook armor, it's not nearly as useful as something like a Doc stim where he can stim you to full HP. So Rook is very, very situational when it comes to that aspect, and then also the extra HP rarely comes into effect, especially now that Extended Barrel exists. They deal so much damage that it's just going to out-damage your Rook armor anyway. So for me personally, I don't think Rook is worth putting anything higher than C tier. He does have impacts on it 2 times on his MP5, but it's just not enough to make up for his situational gadget. Next up is Glaz. I'm going to be putting him in the B tier. This may surprise a lot of you, but I actually think Glaz is a slept-on operator. He has frag grenades and a Gon 6 if you want to bring the most amount of hard destruction that you possibly can, or you can bring smoke grenades on him to help his scope. Also, Glaz's DMR is really slept on as well, especially now that the muzzle brake buff has came through. It has basically no recoil and it's super controllable, and it allows you to get a lot of kills that you normally wouldn't be able to with any other DMR. He also has a bearing 9 if you want to swap out the Gon 6 so you can have an automatic weapon. He pretty much can fill any role you need him to, and that's why I think he belongs in the B tier. He's very versatile. Next up we have Fuze, which I think is another solid B tier operator. I think Fuze's cluster charges are really useful on bomb sites with a lot of vertical play because it allows you to basically eradicate any utility that's in the bomb site. Also, his breaching charges and hard breach charges allow him to play vertically if he needs to. He can open reinforced hatches for your team. And also, his AK-12 is still cracked even after the nerf. So I think Fuze is a really solid operator. His only problem is that you can't run him on bomb sites that don't have vertical play, which is why I think he belongs in B tier, because his gadget is super situational outside of being used for vertical play. Next up, we have Kapkan, and I think this is going to surprise a lot of you, but I think Kapkan is S tier. He has the VSN with the 1.5, which is incredibly strong. He has a Nitro Cell, which is really good as well. And his traps are by far some of the best traps that there are in the game. He can down 2 attackers and damage one of them for 50 HP, which is extremely underrated. A lot of people will say, well, if you just look at doorways, you can shoot them. While yes, Kapkan traps can be countered by just looking at a doorway and shooting them, most of the time you're not going to be paying attention to doorways because of how much is going on in the round. You don't really have time to focus on whether there's a Kapkan trap on a doorway or not. A lot of high-ranked players fall for Kapkan traps, especially if you put them in unconventional locations. And that's why I think Kapkan belongs in the S tier. He just fills so many different roles for his team. Next up, we have Tachanka. I'm going to be putting Tachanka in the D tier. I think Tachanka has some decent potential in the right hands, but the problem is his fire is too situational. His LMG doesn't have a lot of reserve ammo, which means if you want to make multiple rotates, you're going to be blowing through the ammo that you would be able to use for gunfights. And he does have the VSN, but if you bring it, you're sacrificing your ability to make rotates and headholds for your team. Also, he does have a deployable shield, which is likely his strongest aspect, but it doesn't make up for his super situational gadget. You rarely can get utility out of this, and in my opinion, they just need to buff his gadget. Next up, we have Blitz, which is also going to be going in the D tier right behind Tachanka. I do think when the new shield rework comes out, Blitz will have some insane potential, but right now he is really not good. Impact grenades can counter him extremely easily. If you get hit with one impact grenade, you're basically dead, and Blitz is normally used to clear roamers. And so since you're going up against roamers who most of the time have impact grenades, you're just gonna die instantly as soon as you get into a gunfight with any of the defenders. It's really hard to get utility out of Blitz because one well-placed explosive can basically kill you easily. Next up, we have IQ, which I'm honestly gonna put at the top of C tier. After the extended barrel buff, her gun has become absolutely insane, but it doesn't change the fact that her gadget is very situational. You only want to bring her gadget when the other team is bringing operators like Valkyrie and Echo, which they do have a decently high pick rate. It's not worth sacrificing another operator for her, because all she does is counter Valkyrie and Echo, like I said. She doesn't bring you a ton of utility in any other aspect either, because all she brings is breaching charges and claymores. So she has a good gun, and she can counter 2 of the operators in the game. It really isn't that crazy, and you should rarely be running IQ, in my opinion. Next up, we have Jager, which is going to be going in the S tier. After the extended barrel buff, I think his gun has gotten a lot better. And while I don't enjoy playing Jager, his gadget is objectively extremely strong. It's probably one of the best gadgets in the game right now because it can counter every projectile that the attackers can throw at it, except for Capitao crossbow bolts. But I do think that considering how strong his gadget is and his gun is, there's really no argument other than putting him in S tier. Next up is Bandit. I'm going to be putting him at the middle of B tier. Next up is Bandit. I'm going to be putting him at the bottom of A tier. I think Bandit is mainly strong because of the fact that he has a Nitro Cell and a good gun, and if you Bandit trick with him, you can make it really difficult for the attackers to get a wall open. Now, the one reason why Bandit's in A tier is because he just doesn't compete with Kaid, in my opinion. Kaid's gadget is so much better than Bandit's, it's not even funny. Bandit obviously can Bandit trick, while Kaid can't, but if you're just going to place your Bandit batteries down, Kaid is miles better. Next up, we have Buck, which I think is also going to be an S tier operator. I think Buck is by far the best vertical play operator in the game because of the fact that his shotgun has range. He's a 2 armor, which makes him really hard to Nitro Cell because the defenders won't hear him as well, and B, he can run away from them really easily. Also, he has a hard breach charge, which allows him to open hatches while he's playing vertically, and on top of that, he has a Gon 6, which is really useful for clearing hard utility. He literally can fill pretty much every aspect that you possibly want. Also, with extended barrel, Buck's shotgun has stupid range when it comes to taking gunfights. So I think he just has to be S tier. Next up, we have Frost, which I'll be putting in the S tier along with Kapkan. I think Frost is another trap operator that is extremely strong right now. She has the secondary shotgun, deployable shield. Her gun may have been nerfed recently, but if you put the extended barrel on it, it's basically just as good, and it still has a 1.5. There's really nothing that you can go wrong with Frost. Once the rework for Frost comes out, she won't be any good. But right now, Frost is extremely strong, and if you play her right, she can give you a ton of utility. Next up, we have Blackbeard. None of this will surprise you guys. Blackbeard is the bottom of D tier for obvious reasons. His shield is basically paper mache, and he doesn't have good guns, so I'm just going to move on. Next up is Valk. I think Valk is another S tier operator. Her ability to give your teammates 3 additional cameras is stupid strong. Also, her having a nitro cell alongside that allows her to use her cameras to get free kills. Also, the MPX may not be the best damage-wise, but it's a headshot machine. So I don't think you can really go wrong with Valk. She's an S tier. Next up is Capitao. This is one that a lot of you are going to be surprised about, but I think Capitao is the best operator on this tier list so far. He has a stupid strong gun after the extended barrel buff. He has a ridiculous amount of utility because he brings smokes and firebolts to his team. He also has a hard breach charge and Gone 6. He literally does everything you could possibly want. And on top of that, he's a 3-speed. So he's just got to be S tier for me. Next up is Kavera. I'm going to be putting her in the please buff category. Her gadget just isn't good in ranked right now, especially compared to operators like Solis, Vigil, and Oryx. She's just not that good for roaming. Also, her guns are absolute trash. The M12 is like the worst SMG you can possibly have on defense, and her pistol's range is not great. And then on top of that, her shotgun is decent, but you can't run it on most maps because of how low of a range it has. So in my opinion, she needs to get buffs in some way. They either need to rework her gadget or just give her some buffs to her weapons. So for now, I'm going to be putting Kavera in the please buff category. Next up, we have Hibana, which is going to be put in the top of A tier. She has a ridiculous amount of versatility, undoubtedly. She has flashbangs, she has the X Kairos, which can allow her to open walls if you need to, or destroy castle barricades as well. She can also open hatches with her X Kairos, but her one downside is her weapons. The Type 89's recoil is garbage. It has terrible recoil. Now, if you run the compensator on it now with the new patch, it is a lot better, but it's still not the best recoil you can have. And her Bearing 9 is good, but it doesn't make up for the fact that her Type 89 is terrible. So that's the only thing that's holding her back from S tier. If her Type 89 was buffed in any way, she would definitely be S tier for me. Next up is Echo, which I'll be putting in the bottom of A tier. I think Echo is really slept on right now. If you use his drones well, they can give you a ton of intel and help your teammates. Me personally, I like to use my Echo drones to follow roamers and stun attackers when they go to push my roamers. It allows my roamers to get free kills, and it also allows me to give intel to my roamers of where the attackers are pushing them from. It can be a really strong strategy that a lot of attackers have a hard time dealing with. On top of that, he has the Supernova shotgun, which has been buffed recently and has stupid range, and the MP5 SD, which is one of my favorite SMGs in the game, with a 1.5 on it. And he has a deployable shield and a Bearing 9. He's very close to being an S tier operator right now. If his yokais were just a little bit better, I think he would be S tier for me, but right now he's going to be going in the bottom of A tier. Next up, we have Jackal. I'm going to be putting Jackal in the same place I put him last time, which is the bottom of B tier. A lot of you will be surprised by this, but I don't think Jackal is as strong as a lot of people think he is. His gadget, when you scan footprints, just reveals exactly where you're coming from, because it tells the defenders how many pings they're going to get. This allows the defenders to just basically figure out your location by just looking at their HUD. And this is very bad for attackers because it allows the roamers to work together to pinch the attackers when this gadget goes off. But his strongest aspect is in his weapons. His weapons are stupid. The C7E is incredibly strong, and the PDW is up there as one of the best SMGs in the game as well. So I understand why people like Jackal so much. I just don't think he's as good as people think he is because of how bad his gadget is. It is annoying to go against, but it's not that great. Next up, we have Mira, which is once again going to be an S tier operator. This never will change. She is one of the strongest defenders in the game. She can basically make a bomb site that's normally not viable, extremely viable. And she has a secondary shotgun that allows her to set up rotates and head holes. She has a Vector, which is one of the strongest SMGs in the game, and a nitro cell. Like, there's nothing really to complain about with Mira, and she's by far one of the best defenders. Next up, we have Ying, which is also going to be going in the S tier. I think Ying is another operator that's very slept on, especially now that her LMG is a lot more controllable. If you run Compensator on it, you can actually control the horizontal recoil, and it's not that bad. Her Candelas are extremely strong because they can cover the sound of a plant, they can help your team take map control, and they can provide you with free kills. Also, her smoke grenades allow her to, once again, cover a plant. Ying is one of those operators that if you have her in the post plant, she is one of the strongest in the game. And so for me, I think she belongs in the S tier. Next up, we have Lesion, which I'll be putting in the middle of B tier. I think Lesion is a decent trap operator, but because of the fact that he no longer can see his traps through walls, it makes them very niche, and the only utility they really provide is giving you a noise, is giving you an audio cue of where the attackers are coming from. He does have the T5, which is a really strong SMG right now, and impact grenades, which is why I'm going to be putting him in the B tier. He kind of can give you a ton of utility, but it's not nearly as much utility as it used to be when he came out. And there's a lot of trap operators that I would rather run over Lesion. Next up, we have Ella, which I'll be putting in the bottom of B tier. Next up, we have Ella, who did get buffed in Commanding Force. In Commanding Force, we got the Compensator change, obviously, and this Compensator change made the Compensator control a lot more horizontal recoil, and Ella was affected drastically by this. Her Scorpion got a huge buff, and I think that's why she belongs in the bottom of B for me. Her gadget still isn't great, but she does bring a deployable shield, which kind of makes up for it a little bit. So good gun, deployable shield. I can't really complain. I'm going to be putting her in the bottom of B tier. Now for Zofia, who I'll be putting in the middle of A tier. Zofia is by far a better Ashe in every aspect. Her launcher is better because it allows you to burn ADSs and then destroy utility, and also her gadget destroys utility on impact, unlike Ashe that takes a few seconds to destroy things. Also, I think personally Zofia's gun is better. The only bad part of Zofia is the fact that she's been recently made a 3 armor, but other than that, Zofia is incredibly strong, and I think she belongs in the A tier. Next up is Dokkaebi, who I think is one of the strongest attackers in the game right now. Honestly, I'm going to put her behind Thatcher. Dokkaebi is another slept-on attacker. She can hack defender cameras if you get a kill. She can call defenders, and now, when defenders are dead, they can no longer look at cameras while you're calling, which is an extremely strong gadget. She can basically shut down all intel from defenders with a click of a button. Now, her one downside is that she has to run a DMR, but the DMR is still pretty good. And she brings a secondary SMG to help her take gunfights as well if you need it. On top of all of that, she brings impact EMPs to the table, which can help her team open up walls. There's really no downside to Dokkaebi other than her guns, but her gadget is just so strong that I can't put her anything lower than S. Next up is Vigil. Vigil is going to be going in the bottom of B tier. I think Vigil has suffered a lot from Solis even existing. The problem with Vigil is that all he does is hide himself from cameras, whereas Solis can find the cameras and destroy them. So Vigil is still a decent roamer. He's just not worth running over Solis or even Oryx. I think Oryx is a better roamer than Vigil, because all his ability does, like I said, is hide him from drones. So for me personally, I think Vigil belongs in the B tier. He has a solid gun and impact grenades and a decent gadget for roaming. He's just not the best roamer that there is in the game. Next up, we have Alibi, who is going to be going right above Bandit in the A tier. She brings a deployable shield, secondary shotgun, and still a really strong SMG. Even though it doesn't have the 1.5 anymore, it's still one of the best defender weapons right now. And in my personal opinion, I think she belongs in the A tier. She can pretty much bring anything you could possibly want. Next up, we have Maestro, which I think suffers a lot from Brava even existing, which is why I'm going to be putting him in the B tier. Now, Maestro cams can be meleeed to stop them from being seen through, and Brava can just hack them and get control of them, which both of those changes have hurt Maestro a lot, in my opinion, and that's why I'm putting him below Echo. Normally, I would have Maestro above Echo, but to me personally, I would rather be running an Echo than a Maestro in this current meta. Maestro's gun is crazy. The Alda is cracked, and he also brings a secondary shotgun that can help his team make rotates and stuff. But to me personally, I don't think it's worth sacrificing that for his gadget, because his gadget just isn't that great right now. Next up, we have Lion, who I'm going to be putting in the A tier as well, right below Castle. Lion, in my opinion, is one of my favorite roam clearers to run because he has a solid weapon, the Gone 6, and impact EMP. So he can do multiple things for his team. He can help his team open up a wall, he can help his team destroy some hard utility, and he brings a really good gun to help him clear out the roamers. So there's really no downside to Lion. The only thing holding him back really is his gadget. I don't think his gadget is incredibly strong. It's not as good as like Dokkaebi or something, but it is definitely good enough to put him in the A tier. Next up, we have Finka, and honestly, I'm going to be putting her in the bottom of B tier. I think Finka has suffered a lot from the LMG nerf because now her LMG is really hard to control. And on top of that, her Spear 308 has also gotten more difficult because they nerfed its recoil as well. So both of her guns are not great, and her gadget I don't think is worth running because healing is a very niche thing in Siege in the first place. And with Finka specifically, she doesn't heal for that much in the first place. So for me, I don't think Finka's worth running in majority of rounds. She's decent, but she really doesn't belong anywhere other than B tier. Next up, we have Maverick, who got a massive buff recently. With the extended barrel change, Maverick's gun has gotten busted. It is one of the best attacker weapons in the game right now, and on top of that, he brings flashbangs, and his gadget is still really good. The only problem with him now is that he no longer has nades. Him losing nades did drop him a lot for me, because him no longer having nades means that he can no longer open walls by himself. But he's still a really good operator, which is why I'm going to be putting him in A. Next up, we have Clash, who I'm going to be putting in C tier right below Mozzie. I think Clash can be useful in the right hands on the right bomb sites and stuff, but the attackers just have so much utility to counter her. They can use Capitao crossbow bolts to get rid of her. They can use Ying Candelas to blind her and then push her. They can use any form of grenades to kill her. They can use Zofia stuns to knock her shield away. There's just so much the attackers can do to deal with her shield that I just don't think it's worth putting anything higher than C. Next up, we have Nomad, who I'm going to be putting in the middle of B tier. She is a solid flank denial operator, but her air jabs can easily be countered by the defenders just being patient. You can slowly crouch walk around a corner or under a doorway and shoot her air jabs before the air jabs even go off. And also impact grenades can easily get rid of them and things of that nature. So Nomad is decent. She brings decent weapons and a flashbangs. She brings decent weapons and flashbangs, but her gadget just isn't that strong for countering roamers or being flank watch, which is why I'm going to be putting it in the B tier. Next up, we have Kaid, which I think is going to be going in the top of A. Kaid is very close to being S tier for me. I think the only thing holding Kaid back is the fact that impact EMPs exist. With the addition of impact EMPs, Kaid's Electroclaws have become a lot easier to counter. All the attackers have to do is drone out your Electroclaws and then throw impact EMPs on them, and then they get the wall open. So with the addition of impact EMPs, he's become a lot weaker, but that's compared to him being one of the strongest defenders in the game. So I think he still belongs in the A tier because he has good guns, a nitro cell, and his gadget is still by far the best in the game to just place on walls to electrify them. Next up, we have Gridlock, who is going to go in S tier for me. I know that's going to be another controversial placement, but hear me out. She has access to her track stingers, the Gone 6, and impact EMPs once again, which is an incredible combo. And on top of that, she has a really good gun in the form of the F90, which also has magnification sights. So to me, the only downside of Gridlock is the fact that she's a 3 armor. Being a 3 armor on attack sucks because it slows you down and it makes you extremely loud. But for me personally, I think all the utility that she brings to the table outweighs that. Now for Mozzie, who I'm going to be putting in the bottom of B tier above Ella. I think Mozzie has fallen out of the meta significantly. His guns just are not nearly as good as they used to be. He no longer has the ability to make rotates for his team like he did when he had Super Shorty. And also, I just don't think his gadget is that strong compared to something like Mute. Mozzie isn't a terrible operator. He does bring a nitro cell, and he also does counter drones pretty well, but I think if you're wanting to counter drones, you should just be bringing a Mute over him because Mute brings so much more utility and way better guns. Next up, we have Nokk, which I think is an undoubtedly S tier operator. Her FMG9 is incredibly good. She has nades, which is by far the strongest secondary gadget in the game, and against high ranked teams especially, you can get a lot of free kills while using her. Using her to sneak up staircases or through areas that the defenders aren't expecting is extremely slept on, and I think she belongs in the S tier. Next up, we have Warden, which I think is an A tier operator. He has the MPX and the 1.5, which is a really strong weapon. He's a 2-speed. He has the deployable shield, and his gadget is extremely strong right now because of how prevalent flashbangs and smoke grenades are. So in my opinion, I think he definitely belongs in A tier. Next up, we have Amaro, which is going to be the top of D tier. Amaro is basically like Nokk, but terrible, because Amaro is an operator that you want to run as an unexpected pick to catch the defenders off guard. But Nokk is by far better at this, and Amaro's guns are good. It's the G8 with pretty much any magnification sight you could want and an SMG11, but it's just not nearly as good as Nokk because you don't get nades, you don't get anything crazy like that, you don't bring any utility to your team, and most of the time her gadget just ends up with you getting killed. So for me personally, I think she has to go in D tier. They could buff her in some way and make her gadget stronger, but it would be playing a dangerous game. So I think she's fine, but she does belong in the D tier. Next up, we have Goyo, which is going to be bottom of A tier for me. He is a really good area denial and plant denial operator, but the one downside of him is that you have to place his gadget manually, which means that if the defenders get control of the bomb site or whatever location you put his Goyos in, they can use it against your team. But Goyo does have the 1.5 on the vector and a nitro cell, and his gadget, if you place them properly, can bring you a ton of utility, so he does belong in the A tier for me. Next up, we have Callie, who is going to be going in the C tier. Callie has really been phased out of the meta, with EMP impacts coming into the game, Thatcher being banned a little bit less than normal. Callie just isn't worth running. Callie was mainly designed as an alternative to Thatcher, but she really just doesn't make up for it. She doesn't have a primary assault rifle, which really hurts her. She only has access to that sniper rifle, which is super inconsistent and sucks. And her secondary SMGs just aren't able to make up for the fact that her sniper sucks. So to me, I think she belongs in C tier. Maybe if they give her like an assault rifle in the future, she'd become better. But for right now, she's definitely a C tier for me. Now for Wamai, which I'm going to be putting at the top of S tier. I think Wamai's gadget is undoubtedly better than Jager's, but I think his guns are slightly worse, especially now that Jager's gun has the extended barrel. Wamai's guns, especially now that the MP5K got that recoil nerf and all that, it's just not that fun to play in my opinion. Wamai's guns I have not been a big fan of since that nerf, and I just think Jager has better guns, but Wamai's gadget is miles better. It has the ability to capture Capitao's crossbow bolts, and you can place them slowly throughout the round, which means that if you play on a power position with him, he can be extremely strong. Next up, we have Iana, which is going to be S tier. I don't think any of you are surprised by this. Iana brings nades, infinite drones, and extremely good guns. So to me, I think it's pretty obvious she belongs in the S tier, and a lot of you do as well because she's by far the most picked attacker in the game. So yeah, that's where she's going. Next up, we have Melusi, who is going to be going in the bottom of A tier. She is extremely strong at giving your team a warning of where the attackers are coming from. And also she's good at burning attacker utility. Because of the fact that her gadget is bulletproof, there is a lot of situations where attackers will be forced into a situation of destroying it with hard utility. And also her guns are decent as well. She has the MP5, which is a decent defender weapon, and she has a decent pistol as well. So overall, I just think she belongs in the A tier. I think she's fine. Next up, we have Zero, which I'm going to be putting in the middle of B tier. I think Zero has gotten a lot better, especially now that he's a 3-speed. He has a Gon 6, hard breach charges, and his cameras can be decent at flank watch or whatever else you need him to do. And with the recent quality of life changes they gave to him, I do think he belongs in the B tier. He's gotten a lot better than he used to. I'm sure a lot of you know that I used to hate Zero, but he's gotten a lot better. Next up, we have Aruni, which I'm going to be putting right above Alibi in the A tier. Aruni's DMR is just cracked on defense. For a defender weapon, it is super strong, and her gadget is really useful for burning attacker utility. Brava has given her a slight nerf just by existing, because now the attackers can take control of your Aruni gates, so it does limit where you can place them, but for the most part, I do think Aruni is still just as strong as she's always been, and I think she belongs in the A tier, especially because of the fact that she can just natively make rotates and head holes with her fist. Next up, we have Flores, which is a bit of a niche pick for me, and I'm going to be putting him in the bottom of B tier. Reason being, if you run Flores in a round, a lot of the times the defenders are going to start running anti-drone operators like Mutant Mozzie, which is going to make your time a lot tougher with Flores. His guns are good, he has the AR-33, and he also brings flashbangs, which is decent. But the fact that there are so many ways to counter Flores and his drones are just extremely slow, it makes him very hard to put anything higher than bottom of B. Next up, we have Thunderbird, which I'm going to be putting above Ella in the B tier. She's a solid healing operator. She has a good gun, nitro cell, and impact grenades, and she has the bearing 9. And her Kona stations can be useful in a round to help your team revive themselves or get healed. So overall, she's just a decent healing operator. B tier is fine. Next up, we have Osa, who is going to be in the top of A tier. She is extremely strong in post-plant situations because she can just sit behind her shield in cover and peek up when the defenders go to destroy the diffuser. Also, her guns, the 5.56 and the PDW, are both really strong and was pretty much subjective. You can run either one interchangeably and they're both solid. Also, she brings impact EMPs, which can help her team get a wall open. There's really nothing wrong with Osa, and I think Osa is very close to being S tier for me, but right now I think she's in the perfect place she could possibly be. Next up, we have Thorn, who I'm going to be putting in the bottom of B tier. The main reason why I'm putting her here is for her deployable shield and her M870. The deployable shield M870 combo is extremely strong. The M870 is by far the best pump shotgun in the game. Rotates, head holes are extremely easy to make, and also it has stupid range. Also, she has the C7 SMG as the secondary option, which can allow her to take some gunfights at range if she needs to. Now, the main downside of her is her gadget. Thorn's gadget is by far one of the worst traps in the game. It can be useful for forcing attackers into undesirable locations for you to take gunfights with them, but for the most part, they aren't that useful. Next up is Azami. Azami is undoubtedly S tier. She burns so much utility from the attackers, it's not even funny. They normally have to go through 5 of her Kibas in a round, which is 5 Gon 6s or 5 Ass charges or 5 Zofia impacts. She can just go through so much utility with her Kibas, it's not even funny. and she can set up strong angles that the attackers are going to be forced to go into. She's basically just a castle on steroids, which is why I'm going to be putting her in S. Next up is Sins, who I think has gotten a lot better, but I'm still going to put them in the C tier. I think Sins, since the recent extended barrel change, has become a lot better. Their POF9 is a much more consistent weapon to run, but for me personally, I like the 417 more. The 417 is by far the best DMR in the game, and it is super, super fun to run. But the main problem with Sins is their gadget. It has nothing to do with their loadout. Sins' gadget is basically just a bigger smoke grenade, and it's mainly used to protect the plant or to cover sound of a plant or whatever you want to do with it, cover lines of sight, however you want to use it. But the main issue with it is that its hitbox is absolutely garbage. It'll bounce off things despite you thinking that there's plenty of room for their gadget to go through, and it's easily countered by nitro cells and impact grenades. So I just don't think their gadget is worth running when you can just bring smoke grenades, which can complete a similar job with less hassle. Next up is Grim. I'm going to be putting him in the bottom of Please Buff. I'm not going to explain why because you all know. Now for Solis, who's definitely going to be S tier. A Solis is stupidly strong. In the prep phase, she can be used to get rid of most of the attacker's drone economy if they play stupid. Also, throughout the round, if you roam with her, she can easily deal with drones that the attackers throw her way because she knows exactly where they are at all times. She can also get cheeky runouts on attackers that are sitting on their cameras for too long, and she can see claymores that would normally be an issue for her. So all of that, on top of the fact that she has impact grenades, she has an SMG-11, and she can bring a shotgun for her team if she needs to help them make rotates and head holes. There's just nothing wrong with her loadout. She is by far S tier. Next up is Brava, which I don't have an icon on this tier list for, but I'll just use this other IQ icon as her. I'm going to be putting Brava in the top of C tier. Trust me, I know you guys are going to be upset about this, but hear me out. Brava is strong in a couple aspects. She has Capitao's para with extended barrel, which is one of the strongest guns in the game, without question. And she also brings smoke grenades to the table. But where I think she's lacking is in her gadget. The reason for this is because she has to waste a ton of time to get utility out of her gadget, because she has to get on her drone, go hack a piece of utility, and then stay in the range of that utility, so that way it actually gets hacked. And then she has to move on to the next piece of utility. And she has to do that for 6 different pieces of utility if she wants to get the full amount of utility out of her gadget. Also, her gadget is countered by so many things. Her gadget is big and loud, which allows defenders to easily know where it's coming from and shoot it. And on top of that, it can be countered by mute jammers, and Mozzie can get control of it and use it against your team. Also, I think majority of the time when hacking pieces of utility, you'd just be better off destroying it with a Twitch drone. Like, my magnets and Jager ADSs, you're rarely going to get utility out of them when you hack them. So majority of the time, you're just going to want to destroy them. And destroying them with a Twitch drone is much quicker than hacking them. The main time you want to be running Brava is against intel operators like Echo, Maestro, and Valkyrie, but only one of those operators, that being Valkyrie, has a high pick rate. And so considering, in my opinion, that Brava is only really useful against very specific and niche operators, I don't think she's worth putting anything higher than C tier. I know that'll be a controversial take, but trust me, if you wait just a season or two, I guarantee you Brava's pick rate will not be that high. Okay, well, I'm recording this after the fact because I forgot to tier list Ace, but Ace is going to be going in the top of A tier for me, right above Hibana. Ace is a really strong operator. He can open walls extremely easily for his team and safely, and he brings the AK-12, which is by far the best assault rifle out of any of the hard breachers. So all of that is going very well for him. His one downside is that he can't open hatches very well, which is why I'm not going to be putting him in the top of S or anything like that, because if he could open hatches very easily, he would by far be the strongest operator in the game. But because of the fact that he can't open hatches very well, that's why I'm going to be putting him in the A tier. While editing, I also realized I forgot to tier list Oryx, so I'm going to go ahead and tier list him. I think Oryx is honestly a solid A tier operator. He brings the ability to make rotates for his team with a secondary shotgun. His gadget is extremely strong on maps with lots of vertical play because he can jump up hatches, delaying the attacker's time significantly. And on top of that, his primary weapon, the T5, is just absolutely insane. It has high DPS, a 1.5, and pretty good recoil, especially now with the compensator change. Okay, well, as you guys know, this video is strictly my opinion. If you want to have further conversation on this topic, you can follow me on Twitter. I posted the full tier list on my Twitter as well. You can go on there, give your takes, or post your tier list to me, and I'd love to hear from you. Also, if you want to watch another video just like this one, a video will be popping up on your screen right now where I tier list every secondary gadget in the game. So hopefully you guys go check that out and enjoy it. But I'll see you next time, friends, and peace.